Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of My Dog Will Eat My Face. I want to start off by referring to my last podcast, which had a segment within it titled, I Don't Want to Be a Blueberry, which was in reference to the edema that is building up in my system. And for those of you in the dark and don't know what that is, it's basically fluid that your body cannot discharge normally without assistance from medication because the heart is so weak and it just cannot effectively pump those fluids out. So what happens is you end up retaining a bunch of fluid throughout your entire body. It does go to some severe places more than others, but it does affect the whole body. The principal areas where you'll notice it in heart failure is feet, legs, belly, and those are the big ones. Those are really the big ones. So, lucky me, I'm still struggling with that. And that's why I said I'm turning into a blueberry. I'm growing up like the girl in the Willy Wonka factory movie who was just growing larger and larger. And I'm slowly turning into the Michelin Man, despite my greatest efforts not to do that. I had a good weekend of getting a lot of fluid out of my system, and yet roll around on the next day. What happens? My weight went up, and I'm still retaining fluid. It's very frustrating. And I also realized that the blueberry comparison was more apropos than I originally thought, and that I go through phases where I turn pretty blue because I'm having hypoxia, lack of oxygen in my blood and system, and my lips and my face and whatnot will turn blue because I have a lack of oxygen. That's another effect from heart failure. So I didn't even realize it at the time, but the blueberry metaphor was better than I realized because not only am I growing and protruding in all three directions because I'm retaining water, I'm also turning blue. One of my hospice nurses was very nice enough to point that out. Boy, I sure had a happy go lucky ego after that. They told me it's actually worse because you are looking blue. It's more appropriate for you as a metaphor. I need to get that off my chest. Uh, it just seems like I can't seem to do anything right to slow, let alone stop, the unyielding march towards turning into a swollen blue creature. And it comes with all of the discomfort and difficulties that you could well enough imagine. So that is still persisting. But today I didn't want to just whine and bemoan my health issues, even though that's, I guess, one of the whole purposes of this podcast. But I wanted to touch on something else that I've briefly touched on previously, but I want to touch on again because a lot of people don't realize this. If somebody is in hospice care or in any sort of terminal disease situation, they don't have to be in hospice care necessarily. They just could be in a terminal stage of an organ failure. pick your organ of your liking. And what happens is it causes a significant, long lasting, arduous decline. And it takes a significant amount of time for you to reach the bottom, so to speak. And it's a slow, grueling process that I would not wish upon my greatest enemies, frankly. And that's one of the things that I'm going through. Now, on the face of it, from a physical sense, that is awful. It is awful. And very depressing at times. But there's also something else I've learned while going through this that makes this process, quote unquote, of my demise even more difficult. And that's what I wanted to touch on briefly today. So, in short, I've unfortunately been in a long decline for years from my heart failure and now my kidney failure. And I've been strong enough to not die, but not strong enough to really live an exciting, fruitful life. So I'm kind of in a limbo as things slowly get worse and worse. So it takes a lot of time for someone in my position, especially as young as I am, to finally keel over and die. It's a long process. And because it's a long process, I also have to not only deal with these horrible physical ailments and changes happening to my body that I find terrible and disgusting and no fun whatsoever. I still have to deal with the everyday nonsense all of us adults have to deal with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So I can't just sit at home and focus on trying to get the best out of my life. That is maybe joy, perhaps seeing people that care about me. That is maybe spending a lot of time with my dog. There's a lot of things I'd like to do before I die, and I haven't really done a lot of them. And what I have been doing in the few hours I am conscious during the day is deal with those day to day, week to week, month to month issues we all deal with as adults. I still have to make credit card payments. I still have to pay my rent. I still have to take care of my dog who's up for renewed shots in August. I still have to do everything that is normal in life, but things invariably go wrong. For example, in the last week, my insurance through Medicare Part D was completely canceled on me. because of a premium being missing, which I get from my state assistance program, and they dropped the ball. Long story short, my insurance was ripped out from underneath me, and that's a really bad thing that I had to dive into and try to remedy. I think anyone listening to this knows good and well that as you deal with all those day to day things, there is ample room for things to go awry through no fault of your own, but from other individuals or organizations dropping the ball or something happening that is frustrating or challenges you in your life to have to remedy and go through it. Now, if it were just those things in my life, which has been most of my life, I handle it pretty darn well. I know how to adult. But when it is combined and in concert with the physical ailments, it suddenly becomes something else. It becomes something terribly uh, laborious and obnoxious. So, for example, again, last week I had to run around trying to figure out how to get my insurance up and running. I've still not yet fully confirmed if it is. I kind of got a confirmation, but I want to try to push a refill through, and I'm not going to say it's working until that refill goes through. And that's on my agenda today to do. So I have to deal with that while also dealing with turning into a blueberry, growing up with, or boiling up with edema in the worst places. And edema can be very painful too because you're putting a lot of fluid into small places. And it can in turn become very painful in my experience anyway. And so I had to deal with all of my physical problems, lack of energy, severe fatigue, and try to fix a stupid insurance issue. And it was a serious issue. I can't go without insurance. So that is a good example, I think, of dealing with all these physical setbacks, limitations, and distractions, while at the same time, everything else is still going on. Life still goes on. I still have to pay my rent. That's also on my agenda for today. So I've got multiple things today that I have to do, multiple adult things I have to do uh, that are somewhat stressful, one more than the other, sure, but do it in concert with the fact that my physical body is killing itself and feels awful. And I have to do it. The outside world does not care one bit if I fail to do what I'm supposed to do, and it's because of these ailments. For the most part, the outside world, creditors, for example, they couldn't care less about what I'm dealing with. So I have to take care of it somehow, some way. And yes, you can get help from friends and family. I get it wherever I can. The biggest difficulty I have is I'm pretty much sequestered and stuck at home because I'm tied to an oxygen concentrator, and I can't go anywhere because of that. So that makes things much more worse. I can't just stop by at some place to get it rectified. I can't just go to my bank branch and fix something. No, I have to do everything remotely. And once you lose that ability to get out and go around and remedy things that are occurring in your life, you suddenly realize how much you took it for granted once it's gone. So that's definitely, I don't know if it's a problem. It's just the fact of the way it is. I mean, it is a it's very annoying. Even with some help, it's extraordinarily difficult and annoying. And it's kind of like kicking the patient while they're already on the ground. And it just is what it is. It's not going to change, and it's something people don't really think about. And I'm coming to a point pretty soon where I might have to grant a power of attorney to someone because I am getting more and more loopy cognitively, more forgetful. So sometimes I make a mistake, and then the big issue is I got to fix my own mistake. And if that comes to a certain point where it's regular, I'm going to have to get further assistance through power of attorney from someone else. So it's extraordinarily difficult when you combine these that are everyday things with two terminal illnesses. It's a different world for most people, and it's something people don't think about. You think when you're on your deathbed, that's it. No, I've been on my deathbed for years, and I'm still paying rent and paying insurance and dealing with credit cards and debt and everything else, insurance claims, everything. And it doesn't just go away for you. If you are in a situation like mine to where you're lucid, you're cognitive, and you can do those things by yourself, technically, I can get a little help from my family, but only so much because a lot of it only I can do. So if you come across this sort of scenario, if you're dealing with organ failure issue in particular, they can be a very prolonged demise. And you've got to be prepared for that. The rest of the world is not going to care at all about what you're going through. Of course, hopefully your friends and family do. A lot of my friends don't and never had. And a large portion of not a large, but a good portion of my family also never cared. Not one bit. And they're in no position of assistance. So it's rough. It's extraordinarily rough, and that's something I didn't expect. That while I'm sitting there dealing with hospice and my inevitable demise, two terminal illnesses that I'd have to deal with insurance, rent, bills, everything at the same time. And suddenly, those things that were once just being an adult and not a big deal suddenly can become very arduous to do. So, if any of you come to a point where you're facing a similar fate, I would line up some assistance if you can to help you through a lot of those everyday things. Because just because you can do it now, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it in months or years from now. You need to have a plan B in case something like that happens, I think. But sadly, that's not the end of it. That is unfortunately not the cruelest apathy that is served and visited upon you by this earth. It gets worse. And I'll get into that here in the next segment. So, how could it possibly get worse, you might ask? Well, I did allude to some of this already. I've had pretty much zero help from my friends in my life. I had mainly just fun friends. I've only had one friend come and visit me. Actually, technically two. And their response to this has been very saddening. No one wants to lift a finger to help me, for the most part. Oh, sure, they'll share kind words, say they're thinking of me, which is about the most useless possible thing they could do. There's no actual real assistance that's measurable. And then on top of that, when you have friends, you deal with their drama, just like you would if you were totally fine. And to them, it's like they just don't care. They don't care what you're going through. And I've got an example from this last week. My longest friend of my life, we've been friends for over the last 20, like 6 years or something like that. Longtime friend. Told me that I am a bad person. And the prompt from that was purely based on a different perspective that I had than I guess apparently he had on a controversial topic. I'll give you that. I'm not going to get into it. But if someone disagreed with me over a topic, I would never ever say that makes them a bad person and then write them off, which is what he's also doing. I've not heard from him since. Last communication was, "You are a bad person." And that's been a week, and I've not heard a peep since, when I used to hear from this friend daily. Who in their right mind could just cast away a friend for so long purely because of an opinion that differs from yours and results in absolutely nothing to either of us whatsoever? It's not like we got in a fight. It's not like one of us stole from the other. It was a different opinion. That's it. And to me, that's about as low as you can go. To be a friend of mine for 20 odd years, like 26 years, and then suddenly say, well, then you're a bad person because I disagreed with them on something. And insofar, up to today, has written me off and not said a peep since. And there's a lot of that. It's not just him in that example. There are similar experiences with other folks. And it just horrifies me how much the world doesn't care. They really just don't care. When it comes time to buck up and help a friend, at least in my experience these days, it just doesn't happen, period. The opposite happens. They call you names and hang up on you. And that is quite saddening, I must admit. But even though it is saddening, it is an unfortunate turn of events, I cannot let it get me down. The thing is I cannot control other people's emotions or actions. I have zero control over that. And when I am visited with atrocious actions by other people, while it will upset me and might sadden me, it's really up to me to decide how I handle it and where do I go from there. I have no control, again, over these people. It would be completely asinine for me to punish myself further or wallow on these things that other individuals do. Epictetus put it pretty well at one point. He said, you cannot be bothered by another person. That's kind of in brackets. Without your permission. You cannot be bothered without your permission. And that's why I'm going to try my best to not allow people like this, who are the vast majority of this planet, it seems, I'm not going to give them the headspace, and I am not going to give them the permission to bother me, no matter how unfortunate it might be. So, for the example I used with the friend that said I'm a bad person, I, it goes two ways. I've not said anything back because my conclusion is if that's truly how you feel, then I have no desire to be around you or talk to you. I don't want to stick around or talk to someone who thinks of me so lowly. Why in God's name would I want to stick around for that? It was a hurtful comment, yeah. But it doesn't hurt unless I let it. It was designed to hurt, but I'm not going to let it hurt. I'll let him go off and live his life and fester away and lose friends and do whatever he wants to do, I suppose. But I'm not going to let him come in and bother me. And probably apart from this one podcast, I'll never even bother to mention his sudden defection, I suppose, against me. And for the record, I know I'm not a bad person. And so as asinine as someone calling me, I don't know, what would be a ridiculous thing to call me? Oh, God. A neo-Nazi. If someone called me that, I'd be like, wow, that's a meaningless statement. I'd feel bad for them. Or any other outrageous thing they may call me. Because I know I'm not a bad person. I know I'm not those things. I know it was meant to be a hurtful comment, but it doesn't hurt. It does tell me, though, that I should not waste my time with this individual. And it's time for me to unfortunately walk away. But again, if that's truly what he feels about me, I have no business trying to stick around. I have no reason to burden my already burdened life with yet another stupid, nonsensical drama attempted by this individual. And so, too, with my insurance being pulled out from underneath me, I'm going to try to call the pharmacy when I finish this podcast and see if my insurance is truly reactivated now. Because that was a very serious issue. But I didn't lose sleep over it. It was what it was, and all I can do is do whatever I can to fix it. Freaking out about it at 3 o'clock in the morning, as I'm sure you know, is useless. And I don't give my insurance company permission to bring me down and change my judgment of myself. God help us all if insurance companies had that kind of power. But anyway, so I'm not only dealing with the physical ailments and the day-to-day annoying things that I've got to be an adult and do no matter what. I also have people throwing their completely asinine drama around, trying to make everything worse. And I don't know why anyone would do that. I don't know how the person gets jollies doing that. I've never done that. So I know I'm a good person. So that was an extremely revealing accusation, but also an extremely stupid one that I am not going to give any more merit than I would to a dead gerbil. I don't know, pick something horrible. And that's honestly how I see it. Well, my friends, on that happy note, I'm going to wrap up this week's podcast at this point. I've said what I needed to say. I think the most important takeaway for me from this introspection is it is my decision to allow something external outside my control to bother me. Now, if it's inside my control, that's a different story because I might be able to do something to remedy that, but I can't change other people's acts or opinions. I have no control over that. So, it would be foolish for me to be upset over those things. And I really do take Epicurus's statement to heart, wherein you must give permission for something outside your control to hurt you. As far as I'm concerned, permission denied. And I think I'll leave it at that. If you want to support the podcast, you can just go to the website on Spotify, click on support this podcast, or go to patreon.com/mydogwilleatmyface and support the podcast there. But as you can probably hear, my voice is going. Um, that's the red flag from my declining body to shut up and take it easy before I lose my voice entirely. So, with all that said, I must now say, auf Wiedersehen. And thank you so much for giving me a venue to talk about these things today. I really mean that. I thank you all very so much.